One of my favorite discussions every year with crop protection manufacturers or even agronomists from around the country is they'll say, well boy, if we could just get farmers to put on more residual herbicides in the fall, they'd have a lot fewer weed problems come spring. And I try to remind these guys, hey, we farm too. You know what time of year we don't have time to go spraying? In the fall. So how are we going to get this done? But unfortunately, we've got a lot of weed problems now, so many people are saying, you know what, I'm willing to take a day or two and just shut the combine off and go spray. But how do I really make those fall residual herbicides work? We want to talk about that today.
Well, when you said take a day or two off from harvest, I thought that was kind of an interesting point, Brian. Now, if you're all done with harvest, great. Then you've got some time. You can choose to do what's going to pay your farm the best. But even if you are still harvesting, you may say, well, I don't want to stop the combine. Spraying your whole farm may only take a couple of days, depending on the size of your farm. So you could really get a lot done if that was a smart thing for you to do. Now, if you are going to use soil residual herbicides, in many cases, the products that we're using are not going to burn down weeds that are already up. So if you've got some winter annuals out there, you're probably going to have to add something in, maybe a 2,4-D, maybe a dicamba, something like that, to add some burn to control those winter annuals right now. But when we're looking at the soil residual herbicides that just want to set us up for a good spring, so we can just get out there and plant and not have to worry about applying residuals in the spring. You know, we're looking at things in corn like a dual, for example, has been used for many years in this role. It's a group 15, so it's going to last for quite a while in the soil. Again, no burn down activity, but you're going to get that early control on early germinating weeds.
All right, here are the keys though. Number one, you have to make sure you're using a higher rate than normal or the highest labeled rate. So we don't ever want to exceed the highest labeled rate, but just make sure you keep your rate up because there's a very good chance you're going to lose a little bit of that herbicide between now and spring. Another important thing is put it where you're not going to flood out. So you've got to make sure that you can get into that ground early in the spring and get a crop on there. Remember that the best weed killer there is, way better than a herbicide, is crop canopy. So we don't mind so much that, oh, this herbicide might run out a little earlier than the next one if we can get a crop up and growing. My point is you want to spray your fields where you know you can get in and you know you can get in early in the spring. Get that done and you should be in good shape.
Well, Brian, what about the guy that wants to kill two jobs at once and impregnate this pre-emerge herbicide on dry fertilizer they're putting out there?
Not a big believer, because if you look at what your spread pattern is for dry, it's not nearly as good as your spread pattern for liquid. Just think of how few fertilizer granules you have compared to the billions of tiny little droplets of herbicide. You're going to have way better coverage if you go liquid.
So if you spray it separate and then spread the fertilizer separate,
much better performance.
It is two passes across the field, but you're going to get a lot better performance out of the herbicide. Yep. The fertilizer, it doesn't really matter one way or the other, but the herbicide, it's a big deal.
Yes, absolutely. So keep those two things separate.
All right, how about working it in the fall?
Yeah, you can do that. Otherwise, rain will work a lot of these things in too. So if you've got steep ground, then I worry about it running down the hill. But you know, by the same token, if you have steep ground and you work it, now you might end up with more erosion. So there's no easy answer on that steep ground. But all I can tell you is usually rain and snow will work your herbicide in, depending on the product. There are only a few that have high vapor pressure like Treflan or Eradicane.
Well, the crop residue is really the big thing, especially if you're out there in a heavy residue, no-till type situation. How do you approach that?
Yeah, I don't worry all that much about the residue. The herbicide will work its way through the residue over time, so it's generally no big deal.
Well, to wrap things up, if we're going to use fall herbicides, they definitely can be used when we're talking about the residual products. We want things that don't have a high vapor pressure, so we can just lay them out there if we need to. And we want to put it on upland ground where we know we aren't going to flood out, and it's going to work better if we're using higher rates and planting early in those fields next spring.
Well, you may need a fall residual herbicide if you've got our Weed of the Week. We'll talk about it coming up next.